Welcome back, Blake Cousins, Third Phase of the Moon. We're going to go over incredible testimony from Paul T. Hillier, Canadian Defense Minister, and Dr. Greer. We at Third Phase of the Moon want to thank Dr. J. Andy Elias, researcher on a mission, for supplying this incredible interview to us right here at Third Phase of the Moon. He is also now the producer for our Bell, coming soon. Now, let's get to Canadian Defense Minister Paul T. Hillier, along with Dr. Stephen Greer.
These men running the financial system, the banking system, the international cartel, have brought to under one umbrella, as it were, vast riches, so vast that they're almost beyond comprehension. And they have brought this all to themselves by really taking away from the ordinary people who do most of the hard work in this world. So it was a quote that was so relevant, really, to what I wanted to say about the international financial system and what I call the money mafia. It just fit in perfectly. And actually, I have to give credit where credit's due. It was the publisher and editor who found it. And as soon as I saw it, I thought, boy, this is right dead on, and that's a great way to start the book. Some people are never satisfied. They're monopoly players. They've got to have it all. They just keep accumulating. And it goes on and on and on. And they're not just the 650 billionaires. There are more than one or two trillionaires. And they just never give up and keep on accumulating. And unfortunately, at the expense of all of us, because the way they create money, they create it as debt. It's not real money, it's virtual money. They create it as debt, which has to be repaid with interest. So they just are really putting us into a bind. They're making debt slaves of us in order that they can accumulate all of this extra wealth that they don't really need, but gives them, I guess, some sort of pleasure to see accumulating in their books, or their bank books, or wherever they hide the stuff.
It is the one and only Dr. Stephen Greer. Dr. Greer, welcome back.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
It is an absolute pleasure, and I think this is perfect timing because recently I just saw what came about from your week-long CE5 event, and that included some of the most fascinating footage I had ever seen in my life that you were able to initiate, human-initiated contact. And I was wondering if you could tell the listeners a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, first of all, some background. As some people may not know, I've been training people to be ambassadors from Earth to these other civilizations within the construct of universal peace, as opposed to a military program. Well, and this is what I'm calling for in the next phase of disclosure. We'll get to this later in the interview, of mass defections from inside the covert operations that exist. Not one or two people, but a large number of people need to step forward quickly. And another big wave of disclosure, and that will force the hand out of the secrecy box. And the other is, of course, people making contact and doing these protocols and having more and more events happen that get documented that, of course, everyone's going to try to explain it away somehow, but ultimately that's not going to hold. And the extraterrestrial civilizations, what I've gathered from years of doing this with all over the world with people, is that they're measuring our readiness as a people for open contact by how we're behaving, not by just what we're saying and thinking.
And now, technology that can save us from using our fossil fuels, from starving, essentially, things that can end world hunger. And they're at the fingertips of these oil cartels. We know these billionaires have access to them. We know through various witnesses that we have been researching crashed and retrieved disks and other objects that have come from outside this planet, from other civilizations, and we have obviously had a chance to reverse engineer some of this technology and apply it militarily. For instance, Colonel Philip Corso wrote the book The Day After Roswell. And if I'm not mistaken, maybe you can briefly tell the listeners, isn't that what got you on the road to this path and opened your eyes in terms of ufology?
Well, actually, it was the first book that I read on the subject. And it was as a result of reading the book and believing that it was true, and then checking that with a retired United States Air Force general, that I had the courage to, I shouldn't say the courage, but I've decided that it was essential that I go public, because I thought the issues were so fantastically large that the United States people had a right to know what was going on, and the people of the world had a right to know what was going on, whether we're planning to get into a galactic war with one or more species of ETs, or just what the score is. And that, of course, was the reason that I took the stand with the others at the Citizens Disclosure Project. And I thought it was interesting that the consensus of the 40 witnesses was that although the excuse had been given to both the President and to Congress that there were national security issues that decided that they shouldn't be given information as to what was going on, the 40, and I don't know of any exceptions, thought it was really power and greed that were the deciding votes in the cover-up, and that it had nothing to do with national security whatsoever. Now, you probably get somebody that would take have some trouble with that, and maybe, in the early years after World War II, when we didn't know what the Russians had or how many of the German scientists they had and whether they were ahead or behind, there might have been some reasonable doubt and enough to keep some of the stuff secret. But when the Berlin Wall came down and the Cold War ended, we should have had a peace dividend and not have looked for an excuse to actually increase expenditures on wars and weapons that happened as a result of the military-industrial complex and the plan for a new American century.
So if we show them a side of humanity, a face of humanity that isn't militaristic or in denial, because most of what's out there, people either are in denial about this or the ETs get shown a military pursuit or a military approach to their presence. But if the average person who's not militaristic decides to do this for the correct purposes of civilizations coming together as Earth eventually joins this interstellar community, that, I think, is what they're looking for. And the only way that's going to happen is by people doing it. And I'm very skeptical that this is something that can be done from top down, from government leaders. I think it needs to be grassroots from the grassroots up. And if the people will lead, the leaders will have to follow for a couple of reasons. One is at a certain point there'll be too many events like this one or like the Phoenix Lights or other events that happen that they can no longer deny. And the other is that those events will become more and more prevalent as more teams do it. And I think the extraterrestrial civilizations will increasingly come out from behind the veil, if you want to look at it that way, from beyond the crossing point of light, the speed of light, into this dimension. The more that we're acknowledging this and actively trying to make contact within a philosophical construct of universal peace as opposed to endless war. So I think that that's what they're looking for. They're looking for us to reach, what Michio Kaku called a level 1 civilization, where at least we're a peaceful civilization willing to join with them. They're not interested in joining with factions on Earth or, divided, geopolitical alliances or, a militaristic relationship. They're really interested in a genuine relationship that can evolve over hundreds and thousands of years, but in an open fashion.
It was disclosed that the people working in Area 51 had developed both cold fusion and zero-point energy. Who actually owns the patents, I don't know, but I do know that other people have replicated this sort of thing and have always had somebody come around and take it away from them and destroy it or intimidate them in some ways to keep them from getting it into the commercial field. And whether it's the oil companies that own the patents or whether it's the banks or somebody else, it is the cabal, the people who are running the world, who certainly have it. And it's probably there are a number of secret patents. There were thousands of secret patents filed in the post-war period. And I think probably it will require a presidential order to make them public. And this is something that President Obama could do to help improve his record, is to order the disclosure of those secret patents and set the terms so that there are no royalties or no big royalties, no prohibitive royalties in making the technology available to everyone in the whole world.
Hi, Dr. Greer. I'd like to go back to the Florida sighting there, and you seem to know who they are and when they will show up for yourself. Can you tell us, what kind of beings are they? And you mentioned they might possibly be from another dimension. Can you expand on that at all?
Well, no, when I say from another dimension, I'm referring humans are from another dimension. In other words,
Sure.
You have your physical body, but if you have a near-death experience or a lucid dream, you're in something that's been termed the body of light or astral body. Inside of that is the thought body, and inside of that is pure consciousness. So when I say inside, it's not linear. It's sort of a metaphor. Language doesn't really contain. So these are physical extraterrestrial civilizations from planetary systems, like we have a sun and a planet. But when you travel beyond the speed of light, a priori, by definition, you must become transdimensional. You cannot stay in a straight line at the speed of light and go from an alpha, let's say the Andromeda galaxy, which is 2.5 million light years from here, because it would take you 2.5 million years to get here at the speed of light. So you have to then go beyond the speed of light. And this gets into this whole, I wrote a paper back some years ago called The Crossing Point. And it refers to the sciences and the experiences that happen when you go through the crossing point of light. So you have the sound barrier, but you have the light barrier. And believe me, these interstellar civilizations are going beyond the light barrier. When you go through the light barrier, it's another physical cosmos in a sense. The laws of physics of 3D and 4D don't apply anymore. And so, but it's science, but it's a science of advanced interstellar sciences. And so the science of consciousness and the science of electronics that are so-called scalar or longitudinal, that are beyond and go beyond the speed of light, that is a real field of science, which our classified projects understand very well. And so if we're going to be people who are openly making contact with these civilizations, we need to understand this new science. And so these are, in fact, interstellar civilizations from other planetary systems, but because for them to get from one star system to another, they're going beyond the speed of light. They are traversing other dimensions in doing so, and therefore they can appear as trans-dimensional beings or craft. And that is just by definition, an interstellar transport and communication system is also a transdimensional or interdimensional system. I don't know if that clarifies that. I just want to clarify that point. So I'm not saying they're from another dimension. They're from the universe, which contains multiple dimensions. But they're from planetary systems that are physical, but they have mastered the electronics and the science and the physics of transdimensional teleportation, transdimensional communication. And so then when they appear in our, let's say they appear in our atmosphere over an ocean or over your house, they may be fully 3D where you go up and knock on the side of the craft and it's metallic. But they may also be in an energy form where they're shifted. The resonant field of the craft is resonantly shifted, where most of it is in that other dimension. Only part of it is in this dimension as an energy field that may look spherical or circular or triangular or what have you. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
So then you have to say, well, how can they do this? Well, the fact is, most of the time that ETs are around us from other planetary systems, they're not in a 3D materialized form. They're in this transdimensional form, and only when they feel it's safe, so that they won't be targeted with one of our space-based scalar weapons, do they flip into full 3D.
But we have to have a decision at the top to do this, and then for the whole world to get together. And instead of, fighting back and forth with Russia and wondering if China's going to take the lead and all of this sort of thing, that everybody gets together and starts to save the planet that we have been given, one of the best planets, I understand, and that people know about, and with the most resources and the most beauty and just a wonderful planet that we have been desecrating. The way we treat it, it's just awful. We're killing our oceans and clear cutting the trees, the forests, and doing all sorts of dreadful things that we have to stop doing, and do this thing in 7 years and stop global warming. And of course, one of the things that you mentioned off here that is recommended in my book is a massive tree planting program worldwide. Two things: one, to stop cutting down the rainforests, which is fundamental because they absorb so much carbon, and stop that even if if the rich countries have to subsidize totally any of the people that would benefit from cutting them down. Just stop it, period. And then also to start planting trees like we've never seen before right around the world, so that we have the capacity to absorb more of the carbon dioxide naturally through the trees. Well, if we did both of these things, and we could do them both simultaneously, if we organized at the high level of the G20 and worked from there out, our planet might be saved, and we might actually allow the human species to survive. But the way we're going, heaven help us, I don't know where it ends, but all you have to do is look at the intensity of the storms and the weather and the things that are happening, and you can't help but be concerned for what the future holds. And, we're just barely getting into it. This is just the beginning.
A wonderful example of this is back in the 60s. If you read the Disclosure Project book, we had an officer in the Air Force who was at an Air Force base in Oklahoma in what's called a hot zone for nuclear-armed aircraft, and it meant that they were armed with ready to launch aircraft with thermonuclear weapons on them. And Altus Air Force Base was where this occurred. And this gentleman, Mr. Campbell, was there one night as a guard, and this object came over, and it was roughly chevron or triangular shaped. It was cobalt blue. It was literally a few feet above the ground and came in and you could see it with the physical eyes, but it was not solid. It was, you could see the shape of it, but it was this glowing energy form, and it would pass over and was investigating all our nuclear weapons. And as it did this, it was enough in this dimension that the electronic signals that were in the perimeter of this hot zone at the Air Force Base, because these are ready-to-go real hot nuclear weapons, all went off. So all the alarms went off, which required the pilots to come out and take off and launch. They had to get out of there because of the security breach. Now, he witnessed this, and there are other witnesses to similar events. But this particular ET craft was never fully in this dimension. It was only partially materialized. And so the point I'm making is that you can have these ET beings and craft around you all the way fully materialized, like a 747, or they can be completely dematerialized, where the only indication you'll have of it may be an electronic signal going off, or you may have them in some sort of a plasma-like light form. And there's like 1,000 different ways. If you go through this book I've written, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of ways in which these ET craft materialize when we've been out in the field making contact. And so that's what people need to understand. And the reason for that is that they shift between these dimensions as easily as you and I pick up a cell phone and talk. Now, mind you, if you went back a couple hundred years and showed Thomas Jefferson, whose house is just down the road from my farm here in Virginia, a smartphone, it would look absolutely magical. It would be unbelievable. You'd be burned at the stake as a witch. However, now that's 200 years of human technological evolution. Now let's extrapolate several 100,000 or several million years of conscious evolution and technological evolution from civilizations that have gone ahead of us on the timeline of evolution a few thousand or a few million years. Imagine what that technology would look like. And this is why you have to have an enormously open mind, but a deep understanding of the physics of transdimensional communication and transdimensional travel in order to understand the phenomenon that starts happening around you when you go out on a beach or on your backyard, for that matter, and start using these protocols, because it's not always going to be something that you just see with the naked eye. It may be something that is only in a carrier tone. And one of the things that I always remind people is that tonality precedes form. So you can create a sound that will then manifest the form of an object. And, in fact, that's how extraterrestrial manufacturing works. There's a whole discussion I do on these week-long trainings about how do you manufacture these objects. But it's all based in tonality and various resonance tones. Those sometimes will appear around us, and then afterwards we'll see something materialize or happen. And this is all part of why when we have this equipment list that we have very sensitive magnetometers, and as John just mentioned, you can have, if you get this app, it actually turns your smartphone into a magnetometer. It's been programmed so that the compass and other functions of your cell phone will turn into a sensitive magnetic field meter, which is pretty cool. And those will often go off even when there's no magnetic field around you that should make it go off. For example, normally a magnetometer would go off when you take it over to a microwave or an electrical outlet or something like that. But if you're out in a remote area and it's at baseline and all of a sudden it starts going crazy and nothing has changed, you need to have a heads up, because it usually means that there's an ET craft either nearby or around you or underneath you, and something could be emerging into this dimension. So that's why we have these tools with us, these laser detector, radar detectors, magnetometers, and other instruments. And remembering that the human eye and the human ear can only hear and see in a certain range. So we do have equipment that will help with that. The ultimate piece of equipment is your mind, consciousness. Because if you develop your consciousness so that you can accurately remote view and sense, then you will know something's going to happen before it happens. You'll be able to see something with your inner sight more clearly than your outer sight. So I tell people channel 1 is your mind. Channel 2 are your physical eyes. Most people reverse that because we tend to be very animal and very materialistic. But if you really think about it, you don't see with your eyes, you see with your mind. That begins to be a whole new way of looking at your world. And it certainly is a new way of looking at interstellar life, because once you realize that they're traveling faster than the speed of light through other dimensions when they go beyond the speed of light, but that it's not like they have to just suddenly slow down to 10 miles per hour when they're in the atmosphere. Their spacecraft can still be resonating faster than the speed of light and be hovering above your house. Where is it then? Well, it's in this other dimension. It's in the same, quote, place that your astral body is when you have a flying lucid dream. So this is one of the reasons why that area of so-called Area 51, that area at Nellis Air Force Base, was called Dreamland. Because when they experiment these classified programs with these kind of technologies, the experience of the people doing it is that it's almost like you're in a lucid dream.
One of the most important words you said was consciousness, and that's one of the key things. You're ahead of so many researchers and ufologists by several years, if not decades. When people were looking at physical evidence, you were looking at consciousness. And now, finally, several other researchers are realizing that that is the missing link. And I was hoping you could drive the point home to everybody listening about how important consciousness is, and of course the Maharishi effect, in case people out there don't know about it.
Right. Well, this is the crux of it, because the big science of the next 1,000 years, after we can bring out the so-called anti-gravity technologies and free energy technologies that have been around for 50 to 100 years. See, that's already been done. It's people who first hear about it, they go, what? But I mean, that's 20th century science. 20th century science should have been zero-point energy, free energy, anti-gravity, and George Jetson and the cartoons that portrayed that was actually very doable when those cartoons were being made, as a matter of fact. So that's 50 to 100-year-old science. Now, granted, it's still classified, and that's unfortunate, but the real big breakthroughs in science are going to be in the science of consciousness. Studying how consciousness is not just what you are conscious of, but the essence of the aware state. Okay, and being aware and being sentient. And the reason this is important is that not only does it enable you to enter into this expanded state or higher state of consciousness where you can remote view different places in the cosmos, but it also allows you to have an experience of the universality of being. In other words, what are we going to have in common with someone from another star system? It's going to have to be something more profound than, watching the Kardashians on TV.
Beast of love.